Thanks for tuning in again. This is Combustible Podcast. I can't even think of the name of it. It's got Hatch, Bill, Pabell, and Shane here, and we're also joined by Chris Wessels and this Division Chief for a major metropolitan Atlanta department. Welcome, Chris.
Hey, guys. How's it going?
Awesome.
Glad to be here, and I really like you guys' podcast, and I think it's going to be a fun conversation.
Long-time listener, first-time caller.
That's right.
So let's start off by getting a little background information about you, Chris. How did you get into the fire service?
Okay, I'm the stereotypical kid that fell in love with fire trucks before I could ride a bicycle. Watched Emergency religiously growing up. Kind of aged me. In my household, Saturday night, the fight for the color TV was Emergency or All in the Family. So I got vetoed out. So the first half hour, I'd have to watch Emergency on the black and white TV, and the rest of the family watched All in the Family. And then I got to watch the last half of Emergency in color. So I pretty much got this sickness as long as I can remember. And when I went to Auburn, I found out they hired part-time people. And then I eventually went full-time there, but much to the chagrin of my dad, I kind of was doing college and firefighting at the same time.
Chris, what'd you go to college for? Did you get a degree in a particular?
I went there to get a degree in engineering, but my study habits and discipline ended up getting me a degree in operations management.
And I don't understand. I don't know what operations management is. Real quick, just
basically it's the skirting of engineering. It's production and manufacturing, quality control, and management and stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay. I'm always fascinated by what people have gone to school for and what they end up doing in life. Rarely, with the exception of doctors and lawyers, do you find people that say, "Yeah, I went to school for this, and that's what I do."
All right. And go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, you're the guest. You go ahead.
Well, it's funny because engineering was kind of the expected path because my dad was an engineer, my oldest brother's an engineer, my other brother's in school for engineering, so it's kind of like the default. And but like I said, between my study habits and getting distracted by the fire department, that degree really didn't work out.
So did you end up leaving Auburn and then trying to immediately get hired on with a fire department, or did you try and work in the organizational management field and then?
No, I worked for Auburn Fire. I worked there part-time for a year, then went full-time. And then when I graduated, I stayed another year while I was figuring out what I was going to do. And I applied to several different metro departments. And got hired with the department I've been with now for 27 years. And it's funny because Cortez Lawrence, some people may be familiar with him. He was the one that actually started the smoke diver program in Georgia back in the late 70s. He ended up being our public safety deputy director at Auburn. And he was kind of a pretty big mentor of mine. And he's the one that steered me towards where I work. But had I not gotten hired, he was kind of working on me to go OCS in the Army because he had a military background and he was a Vietnam veteran, combat veteran. And so had I not been hired by my department, I was probably going to very seriously consider going Army OCS.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So for the department that you do work for, what was your path through that as far as positions and ranks?
I was fortunate in that I pretty much hit everything. I started obviously as a firefighter at a single house and went to a double house. Neat story there too. My first day in the station, and I hadn't said squat to anybody. I was trying to be the fly on the wall in recruit school and everything. My battalion chief came in the first day and said, "Hey, I know you probably like a double house. Just be patient. We're going to get you to one." And I mean, this guy didn't owe me anything, and back in those days, the battalion chiefs were like, semi-gods. The shift commander was God and the battalion chief was kind of the tier under. Yeah. Yeah. The right hand of the father, and you didn't, as a rookie, you didn't talk to your battalion chief. Good morning, sir. And then you went about your business. So for him, on my very first day of meeting me, for him to say that kind of struck me odd. And sure enough, like 10 months later, this is kind of a cool story too. They sent me to a really good double house near my single house and to ride for 3 shifts on the truck. And after the third shift, or at the end of the third shift, my captain at that house said, "Hey, you want to stay a couple more shifts?" I was like, "Yeah." And he called battalion. He said, "Okay." Then like an hour later, he called me back up front. He goes, "Hey, you just want to stay here permanent?" I was like, "Yeah." And
this is a good system.
Hell yes.
Oh yeah. So that fourth shift, I put my stuff by the back door of the truck cab, and the veteran firefighter goes, "What are you doing?" I was just putting my gear out. He said, "Oh, no. You're a member of this company now. You're on the engine, buddy." And he said, "I ride the truck."
You got hoodoo.
And then another funny story, my captain, he was a great old school fire captain. And he, after like 3 months, he looked at the paddleboard with my name, and he goes, "Your name's not Wetzel?" And I said, "No." He goes, "Well, why didn't you let me call you Wetzel?" I was like, "Didn't really matter. I knew you were talking to me." And he goes, "What's your first name?" I said, "Cap, I've been here 3 months and you don't know my first name?" And he was dead serious. And he said, "Well, I wanted to make sure you're going to work out before I bother to learn your first name." And I think we need more of that today. We certainly don't need some of the hazing stuff that went on in the past, but we need more of that kind of, in a respectful way. You've got to earn
your spot,
your way, your spot.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to challenge you on this. You are one of the most aggressive about getting to know the people of anybody I know in the department. You're very approachable. You're a very easygoing guy to talk to. And obviously, I've known you for years, so I'm not just talking about from my level. I'm talking about for the firefighters. You're very outgoing with them. So how could you say at the same time that you think that that's something you should do, but you work very hard at being a man of the people?
Well, I'm not going to answer for him, but
yeah,
his
let him answer,
position,
then you jump in.
his position's a little bit different than the captain.
I know, but I'm telling you, he's still very, very approachable. He always has been.
But I guess what I meant was, like, in recruit school, I wasn't going around, "Hey, I want to work at this station," right? So for that battalion chief to just tell me that out of the blue struck me odd, because I wasn't like politicking to get to a double house, I guess is what I meant, Yeah, that's all I meant.
So were you?
Yeah, I know.
You saying more like let your actions speak instead of your mouth?
I guess so. Yeah, I guess so. Because what I found out, and kind of, the other part of the story I didn't tell, our captain at training, like halfway through recruit school, he used to call us up to the office. He's like, "Recruit Hatcher, to the office." And you had like 2 seconds to be up there. Everybody had to do push-ups. And it was payday, so he's like, "Recruit Wessels, to the office for checks." So I go hauling up to the office at the training center, and he gave me the checks for everybody. And they said, "Hey, I'm going to try to get you to choose a 10. I was like, "Okay." And I didn't hear again. I didn't say anything else. Unsolicited, just totally out of the blue. It kind of floored me. And I didn't say a word to anybody, because I'm like, I don't know why he told me that, but I knew those were good stations. I'm not killing this. I'm not saying it. So the other cool thing is, I found out after the fact, the reason I didn't go to Double House initially, a guy in the recruit class after us, his father used to be with our department, and he went to another department, and he had died of a heart attack. And out of respect for his legacy, they gave his son one of the double houses in my battalion, because my battalion chief had a relationship with his dad when he worked for us, and so it's kind of like out of respect and honor to his late father. And that made me feel even better that I didn't go to a double house because of the reasons. Does that make sense?
Right.
Yeah.
And some people could say, "Oh, that's political," or "That's favoritism," or, to me, it was just honoring that man's legacy by getting his son a start in his career at a good station. But anyway,
I digress.
I know, right? I digress.
I got a question, Chris. This is Pabel, and I know you. We've crossed paths, but I know you mostly by reputation. And what I'll say is, you mentioned about, back in the days, the BC was like the second hand of God. And when you're approached by them, even with this story you just told, where you felt almost favored to go, that they would even engage with you, try to remember your name and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Your reputation precedes you as one, I would say, like Hatch just mentioned, that you're very well respected, but also that approachable mentor type person. So I know in the past, it was that grit, that person that wouldn't give you the time of day, the person that, was just, you wouldn't hear 3 words from them. And that may be the mentor. And there was very few people that were that approachable, let's say at the leadership level. Like you were saying, BCs were something that you just didn't talk to. They just did their stuff. But, and correct me if I'm wrong, it doesn't appear that your career led you in that direction, because almost anyone that I would ask, they would say, you are a mentor, you are approachable. So if that's a fact, then what caused you to go in that direction, being more of an approachable person, more of wanting to remember names, more of wanting to, what I would interpret as invest a lot of yourself into the fire service, versus the one that is just silent, grit, out on the side, and doesn't give you the time of day unless he feels it necessary, if that makes sense?
It does. And I think it's 2 things. Maybe 3 things. Part of it is kind of who you are, because I think who you are as far as a person is always going to transcend your environment, I think. Secondly, 2 incredible mentors I had. My shift commander at Auburn, he was an amazing mentor, equal to my father, but in different ways. And it was being a smaller department, 2 stations, 65 people. It wasn't that formality of structure. And he was so approachable, so amiable, so just down to earth. And so I think his influence and his leadership style had a big influence on me. And then Cortez Lawrence. Cortez, if you came to him with something, he would give you unbridled authority to do it, as long as you just kept him updated. So I kind of was fortunate in that I was in an environment where people kind of mentored and inspired that. And it's funny because we kind of had a round robin of fire chiefs for a while at Auburn, and we had a guy that came in from Montgomery, super competent, super professional, but he was that straight line, dictatorial, I'm the boss. And he and I were like oil and water, did not get along. Mm-hmm. And so to say that, I think the third part is it's generational. I think our generation is the one that started to kind of break out of that whole mindset where whether it's children should be seen or not heard, or telling the rookie, we didn't hire you, we hired you from the shoulders down, we don't care what you think, we just want your brawn. All those kind of obsolete mindsets we put into young people, that I think our generation is the one that started breaking those barriers and saying, hey, wait a minute, there is some value to somebody even though they're new. And I think I think those things together, and I was just fortunate because of the leaders I had. And with that battalion chief that, you really did, he was super nice too. He was super amiable and very respectful. It just wasn't the thing that the rookie chatted with the battalion chief. But he wasn't one of these hard-nosed, he was a very approachable, very kind-hearted person as well. So, and it's funny, I look at not just in the fire service, but I look at management as a whole used to be so dictatorial. And then I guess kind of maybe this relates. What you have to realize is you're nothing special. Whether you're the governor of Georgia or you're the fire chief of the biggest fire department, you're nothing special. And we're all a couple strokes of fate in life away from being that homeless person that we look down on, right. Or could possibly look down on. All of us are 1 or 2 bad strokes of fate away from that same life. So when you start factoring in the fact that, hey, I'm an assistant chief or I'm this, but it doesn't make me any better. That just gives me a different role. So I guess that's kind of maybe wraps a bow around it.
It makes perfect sense. I agree with that 100%.
Chris, this is Bill, you're making me remember that at my first station, it was a battalion station, and I was rookie firefighter, and some of my fondest memories, now that I'm remembering it, were sitting out back at the station at the picnic table with the battalion chief and my lieutenant. And I mean, we'd sit out there till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning just with them telling stories.
Right. But like you said, and at the same token, you knew the line. Like you didn't go to the chief about stuff. You went to your captain about stuff, and more than likely, it never left the firehouse.
Right.
But yeah, so it's interesting because I think we've kind of gone a little too far the other way now. I think we have to kind of reel some of it back and kind of find a middle ground. And it's interesting, we always talk about what's the generation we always talk about now that now they're saying Generation Z, but what's the ones we always complain about? That
the millennials.
Millennials, yeah. Well, a few years ago, they had an Army Aviation Conference at the Georgia World Congress Center, and they had all their rotary wing aircraft in the Congress Center. They flew them in and rolled them in. And we were walking around talking to this guy who was a 30-year veteran. He was a crew chief, and he was like an E8 maybe, pretty high up, E8 or E9. And his name, I'll never forget, he was from a South American country, and his name was Oscar Gomez. And he immigrated to the U.S., and he served in the United States military because he wanted to serve his new country. And I said, my God, 30 years, when are you going to give it up? And he said, when it's not fun anymore. And so I said, hey, in the fire service, we always complain about the new rookies and the new generation. What's your viewpoint of an Army recruit in now versus when you came in? This was back in 2007. So this was in 2007 versus 1977 when you came in the military. And he said, still the same willingness and eagerness to serve, the same desire to do good. He said, the difference is my generation provided the service, and that was the end of the discussion. He felt like the more younger generation had the caveat, now what do I get in return? So maybe that's one of the differences. The younger generation is looking, they're just as dedicated, just as capable, just as smart, just as eager, but there's that caveat of looking for a little bit more of a return.
So where does that,
and I thought,
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Chris. Where does that mentality fit into a profession that most of us see as this selfless laying down our lives for other people? I'm not asking for anything in return.
I think it's our responsibility to teach them that, because obviously they didn't figure it out along the way. But it's our responsibility to teach them that through example and mentoring, as opposed to ridicule and ostracizing. And another great example, a guy Hatch and I went to recruit school with, and he left to go to another department. And he's an icon. He's about to retire, but he's an icon in that department. He's one of the best driver engineers in the department. And guys were griping about the millennials. And he said, let me tell you guys something. He said, you put me on this pedestal. He said, before I came in the fire service, the biggest thing I ever drove was a Toyota pickup truck. I'd never used, Chris Wessels taught me how to use a circular saw when I built the workbench for my first house. And he started rattling off people that taught him how to do things. He said, all these things you put me on a pedestal for, I got through the fire service. And I didn't bring them to the fire service. He said, so why are we sitting here ridiculing these young guys because they can't do this or don't do that or don't know this? Right. It's our job to teach them,
Yeah.
So I thought that was pretty cool. Yeah.
So we got through you being a firefighter.
Oh,
we haven't moved any further than that.
Oh my God. Okay, let's fast forward. So
yesterday,
made lieutenant, made driver, loved that spot. My plan was to be a driver for 6 years. They told us our recruit class wasn't eligible for lieutenant, and one of our guys challenged it, and they researched the records. Oh yeah, you guys are eligible by 2 days. Took the lieutenant's test, made lieutenant. Spent 3 years as lieutenant. 3.5 maybe. Took the captain's test. Spent 3.5 years as a captain, and then begrudgingly took the BC process and made BC. Then made AC. Did a stint as the operations chief, and then went back to AC. And that's probably what would be a whole nother podcast worth of stories there. And I will say this. My most fun position was driver. my most gratifying position was captain.
You know, you're bringing up an interesting point, Chris, because I get that question every once in a while from recruits as well when we're just in talking to them and letting them ask questions, and they'll say, what's the funnest part of your job? And I have to remind them there's gratifying and there's fun. Exactly what you said. Those are two completely different things.
They are.
You said you begrudgingly took the battalion chief's test.
Yes, I did, because I love being a captain. I felt like I finally become at peace with myself and my career. Because I was always striving for something, you know, wanted to get certified as an extra engine driver, wanted to get certified as an extra truck driver, wanted to make FAO, wanted to get rope class, wanted to get this, wanted to get on the, you know, the heavy, wanted to do this, do that. And so I made captain, and I was like at peace, because it was the last thing I could do on my own, because beyond captain, you know, it's appointed. So captain was the last achievement I could earn legitimately on my own, and I was at peace. I loved it. But I wasn't totally satisfied with who I saw stepping up to be BCs. And I was like, you know what? If I don't try to step up myself, I can't complain. I didn't enjoy being a BC, though. I did not like that spot. I enjoy ship commander. Say another quick sidebar. And I think all this kind of does relate to mental health in a roundabout way, because your mentors do a lot to help build who you are and give you that strength and that fortitude to get through the tough times. But when I was teaching at FDIC, I was on the fence about taking a lieutenant's test, because I wanted to still just stay a driver. And this guy named Kogan, he retired out of Rescue 3 in FDNY with a on-the-job injury. And he was an instructor up at FDIC. And we were drinking a beer one night. And I said, yeah, I'm eligible for lieutenant, but I'm not going to take the test, because I love being a driver. He said, Chris, let me tell you something. You don't ever pass up an opportunity on this job. You go back, sign up for that test, and take the test. So I made lieutenant. So the next year at FDIC, I searched him out, and I told him that I made lieutenant, and it was only because of his motivation. And this is like Salt FDNY lieutenant on Rescue 3. And the guy started tearing up.
Wow. That's
And
awesome.
I thought that was pretty
awesome.
cool. Yeah.
You made a light bulb go off on Bill's head.
Mike Kogan. It's Mike Kogan. I suppose Mike Kogan is his name. Awesome dude. I'm sorry. Light bulb went on.
I said you made a light bulb for Bill go off.
Yeah, Chris, you said something that I had not ever really, it never registered with me, that captain was the last thing that you could do on your own without somebody else. And that I've never thought of it that way. That's a very, very interesting perspective. That really does change.
And to parlay onto that, that's why I tell people, you can't be mad if you don't make whatever chief you're striving to make, and you can't be arrogant if you do, because it was on somebody's decision, not on.
Right.
You'd like to think it's on your merits because of what they saw in you, but not necessarily. So, you know, don't hate the department because you don't make chief, and don't think you're the baddest thing around because you do, because, you know, it's kind of anybody's game at that point. At least in the departments in this area. Yeah, stay humble. You know, there are departments obviously where that's tested, but in our area that's generally not the case. So don't let it go to your head. You know,
right.
And it ties into that servant leadership thing, in that which a lot of people are now using as a buzzword, but it's, you know, if you ever declare yourself a servant leader, you're probably not a servant leader. But you know, we're stewards of these positions. I don't own my rank. I'm a caretaker of the rank while I have it. The citizens of my city, I almost said it, the citizens of my city own the rank I possess right now, and I'm the caretaker. So, you know, how can I be arrogant for something that's not even mine? You know,
I really like that.
Yeah, that's two light bulbs for you, Chris, if you're keeping score. You're lighting me up.
So what did you not enjoy about that battalion position? You said that's the one that you favored the least?
I felt like a lieutenant again. You know, because like when you're a double house, you're a lieutenant, the captain runs the house.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And so I kind of felt like a lieutenant to my shift commander as a captain, you know. But I had a great shift commander I worked for. he was one of my huge mentors. So it was a great working relationship. And then here's the other thing mistake I made. I got involved in too much stuff. I wasn't married at the time, didn't have my family. So anything to try to help make the fire department better, I was into it, committees, So probably I worked myself too hard and I wasn't able to sit back and enjoy where I was at. So I think that was part of it too.
Yeah, I think most can probably sympathize with giving too much of themselves, and that can suck the joy out of things.
Yeah, not pacing yourself.
Yeah.
But anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Have you ever been up for a promotion that you didn't get?
I got one taken away.
Well, I know. Yeah, we won't get into that one.
Chris, we had told you we were going to talk about one thing, but you have kind of segued. You've segued into something that we were going to talk about in another episode that we were going to record right after this one, and it's kind of a perfect opportunity to talk about it right now, which is the idea of what do you do when you don't get promoted? How do you deal with being passed over, and what do you do when you go back to the station or you go back to wherever your assignment is, and people are looking at you and you're examining yourself? And
it's simple. It's so simple. You remember the core purpose of why you're there. You remember the foundational values that brought you there in the first place, and you go back to work.
So I always say that I experienced the 5 phases of grief or whatever those, I can't remember what they're called, but the acceptance and the bargaining and all of that stuff. And I end up going through all of those. I'm not as good to just go back and, I don't stop working, but I end up going through this mental processing thing, and it's never the same. I don't deal with those 5 things in the same order every time. And I think one of the points that we were kind of going to get to with the whole idea is that a lot of the younger firefighters see those of us who have been promoted as just being promoted. They don't see all of the times that you tried to get promoted that you weren't promoted. That it was this process. It was keep trying and keep performing. And,
And I was very fortunate in that I never missed a promotion. And this one really doesn't count when they were looking for a fire chief.
You might be the wrong person to talk to about this subject. I'm just kidding.
No. I was just fortunate. But I tell you, and the other thing people got to understand, everything's by a razor's edge. I almost did something on my FAO test that would have been an automatic failure, and I would have been out. I miscalculated the pump problem and kept making the same mistake over and over and over until one of the evaluators said, "Don't waste time arguing, work your problem." And I worked it one more time, read loud to myself. And so, people kick themselves. I would have kicked myself too, but you got to understand too, sometimes you're a razor's edge from making it or not making it. So again, don't beat yourself up, figure out where you can improve, go back and kick it in the butt the next time. One thing I did go for that I didn't get, and I knew I wasn't going to get it, when they were looking for a fire chief, they were just throwing a net out there. And I got a call from the recruiter, "Hey, your name was submitted to apply for fire chief." And this was back in like 2010. And I applied just because, part of it's ego, part of it's, wow, somebody actually put my name in. But come to find out, they were just throwing a net and asking everybody and their mother to apply. But so technically that's something I went for and didn't get. But I wasn't expecting it. I wasn't hoping for it. And I probably would have been scared to death if I got it at that point, So anyway. But, a lot of good people that you think are just going to ace promotional tests have difficulty. And a lot of times it's just learning the process, really, because they're technically competent. But you just got to learn the intricacies of whatever that promotional process is and learn how to succeed and be successful with it.
Well, and I'd say for me personally, when I had been passed over previously, a lot of my difficulty processing it was wrapped up in not only that I didn't get promoted, but who got promoted. Because I start to tie my value to what I say is my perception of their value and how I do this better and I do that better, and that's just this endless pit that you fall into, and it never, you're never going to convince yourself. So
you said you liked
you're
fire
right.
trucks when you were a kid. Are you building one in the background?
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you guys hear that? I
Yeah,
apologize.
we can hear. I've been listening to it the whole time.
I'm in the workshop because my little guy's upstairs with my wife, and if he sees me, it's over because he'll be all up in my face. But I'm just nervous energy organizing in the workshop, so I'll stop that.
That would be awesome.
So one more thing, Chris, with this idea, and you mentioned just getting back to work, and we had someone in our department whose philosophy on getting passed over was that you don't. What I'm going to say could be taken aggressively, but he was not a proponent of using it aggressively, but it was this idea that if I get passed over, I'm going to make the person who made that decision basically realize they were wrong for passing me over through my actions. I'm going to continue doing my job and doing it well, and at some point they're going to go, it was a mistake not to promote that person. And I think that's kind of you could do it aggressively. I'm going to make you realize, you fucked up, that kind of crap. But if you do just put yourself back into it and get back to doing what it was that you were doing, that you thought was the reason you were going to get, it might work out the next time.
And I think this is Shane, Chris, that kind of bodes well into what we hear a lot of times in this particular topic is when you don't get promoted, what you do at that point says a lot more about when you did get promoted.
That's true.
Oh,
So,
of course, character.
Yeah, because then you really start to strip back an individual, and not that they're, everybody has their faults. So as they're working through this grief model, like Bill likes to say, which I think is appropriate, but you definitely get to see who people are sometimes. So when you don't make it, you definitely get to take a look in the glass a little bit.
It's funny you say it. You're absolutely right. And just super brief, when I made assistant chief, I didn't make myself assistant chief. I was appointed to that position. There was it was battalion chief. There was a guy who, by all rights, should have made it before me. Veteran, sharp guy, but whatever, he didn't. He ended up making it shortly thereafter. But the first time he saw me after the list came out, he looked at me like I just slapped his mother, and wouldn't talk to me for, till he made it. And our paths didn't cross a lot, but it just always resonated with me because I was like, I didn't make myself,
Right.
So first of all, why be mad? Secondly, if you're going to be mad, don't be mad at me, and here again, I think that's when true character, because this particular person was always in the old regime was like the up and comer, and the regime changed, and that's the other thing is people hitch the wagon to people, and people change. So, if you decide to hit your wagon of what you think your path to whatever you visualize as your success is, understand if that wagon breaks down, your actions are going to dictate where you move forward, and how the new regime perceives you and all that kind of stuff. So and that gets into the whole political thing, which is probably 17 more podcasts worth of stuff. And it's just,
Well, we need topics.
We do need to.
yeah, but and this kind of goes, maybe segues into the mental health stuff, is when I was a union rep, in the late 90s, early 2000s, I kind of came up with a little slogan. I said, why is it that we are in a profession that's geared towards helping others, but we do so much to hurt each other?
So true.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
And it just boggles my mind. And you look at,
Because
you look
we're
at a lot of
humans.
issues. Yeah. Because we're humans. We have envy. We have jealousy.
Right.
We have, pride and greed and all those things. But it's, I don't know. It's just, and here again, a lot of this stuff's easier said than done, right? But
Most things
but I
are
think
easier said than done.
yeah, no doubt.
Chris, this is Pavel, and we've kind of skirted over some of the mental health things a couple of times, and one of the things that I wanted to just get your opinion, your thoughts on, is we know that the mental health topic is just something that's pressing today. It's in the forefront. Most departments are addressing it one way or another. You can't turn the computer on without seeing an article in it. Or the effects of poor mental health in the fire service. You know, not the argument, but some of the debate that you'll hear is why is it so prevalent today? Did we not have this problem 2 decades ago, or was the problem just present and we weren't really putting statistics? It wasn't in the forefront. We didn't have the media stream that we have now to go, hey, here's the data, here's the facts. So if something happens to somebody, we immediately know about it. Do you think that this is just catching up with us now and we're addressing it? Do you think it's always been an issue? It's just been kind of not addressed, not in the forefront? What are your thoughts on what's going on now?
Well, that's I think that's the easy answer too. And I'll use it might be a goofy analogy.
I love analogies. They're my favorite.
Have you ever had a roof leak?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. Do you think houses 50 years ago had roof leaks?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So there was a guy that back in the early 90s, the Gypstick brought this guy on board that was a psychologist to start dealing with mental health and public safety. And he told a story back then as he was going around the state, kind of, I think it was a fire police chief, but he was in, wherever, Georgia. And this chief said, before you came along, we never had any of this. Back then, they didn't call it PTSD. They called it critical incident stress, right? Mm-hmm. He said, before you came along, we never had any of this critical incident stress. You're stirring up a hornet's nest. So I think it's always been there. We ignored it. We pretended it wasn't there. People self-medicated. People did counterproductive things in personal relationships. People, indulged in destructive activities. I think it's always been there, and we've always just ignored it. And I think another great analogy is, and this is something we have to change in society as a whole. If your knee hurts, what do?
Go to the doctor.
You go to an orthopedic doctor. If your belly's been hurting for a week, you go to the doctor. If you tear your shoulder, you go to the doctor. If your mind is jacked up, oh no, I don't want people to think I'm crazy. I'm not going to a psychiatrist or a psychologist. People think I'm crazy. But your mind controls all that other stuff that we just talked about. You get fixed. So there's this, in society as a whole, there's a stigma with seeking out mental health. But your mental health affects everything else about you and your life. So as a society as a whole, we've got to get past the stigma of seeking out mental health. Doesn't mean, you've got, and crazy is a derogatory term, I guess, but it doesn't mean you're crazy. It just means you need help. You need to fix your mind just like you need to fix your stomach or your knee or your ankle. And I will say our department and our city is, I think, very proactive with mental health. We have had an excellent employee assistance program that I've dealt with at a very detailed basis for over a decade, and I've seen a lot of good come out of it for our people. So, back to the original question, I think it's always been there. We're just being more proactive at recognizing it and trying to address it. But we've got a long way to go. And I think it's every bit as important as your physical fitness and every bit as important as knowing how to throw a ladder. Because none of that stuff matters if your head's not squared on straight.
Well, I couldn't agree more. I'll tell you, some of what prompted the question is about 3 weeks ago, there was a post that came out by Combs, the picture, and it has a firefighter sitting there. And what it says on there is, you're a firefighter, that's cool. What's the worst you ever saw? And then,
oh yeah,
I think most people are aware of that picture. If you haven't, look it up. And then the firefighter is looking to the side, and obviously there's silhouettes, and it says, which one of us are you going to tell him about? And I thought that was such a powerful picture. Well, I put it up, and I just put up, so true, don't ever ask. Well, that prompted a bunch of questions, and from some of the, let's say,
don't ever ask. I'm going to ask him a bunch of questions.
Right.
I'll consider it.
I'm sorry, I'm laughing.
So what it prompted is some of the younger guys that would say, hey, don't you think we should be talking about this? And I wanted the further explanation with them. My mindset was telling the public, and this is kind of what I explained to him. Look, we have to live with this stuff. We're sworn to protect. One, we don't want to be reminded of it. Two, we definitely don't want you to relive or to live through what these images are or anything else. So I'm not saying don't talk about it.
But isn't that the difference? That those people are saying, shouldn't we talk about it? Yes, you should talk about it to your peers, to people that are.
That's correct.
This is a cartoon that shows some,
a civilian.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And that's what I was trying to explain is
that's not healthy.
For the civilians, I was trying to tell them, don't ask us that. Don't make us relive that. Don't make us look at those images on the side.
Yeah, I always tell them that you really don't want to know. You don't want to know what my worst call is.
No.
Right. And one of the questions that was posed, an individual, he said, look, you guys have been doing this for a minute. Shouldn't we tell them about it? Shouldn't we educate the public? And I said, yeah, we should educate the public to let them know that we see some extremely difficult things, and these are not things that we want to relive, and we would want to protect everybody from, including them. And I think you hit on this, and you're 100% correct. The mental health issues need to be handled with mental health professionals, and our ability to have the discussions is amongst peers that have a good understanding of it, not infecting the public. That doesn't do nothing for them, really. It's not, and for us, reliving a moment with somebody that will not understand. And I just listened to something here recently that honed it home, which is your average person has not even seen a dead body. The average person walking around hasn't even seen a dead body. And
absolutely not.
And for us, the stuff that we see year after year and the things that we do is, it just flushed back there in the back of the mind. But when you stop to think and say, well, your average person walking the street, whether it's a spouse or a family member or a friend, they have no concept of that. They don't see it. So for me to even try to explain it, it just doesn't do any good in my opinion. So it's a self-discussion, the peer-driven support systems that are being created as well, and you hit on it, and I think it's spot on. I think cities, counties, municipalities should be looking into professional help because the brain is an organ, and it requires just like you said, just like a lung or a heart, where, cancer is a big deal, where we're paying attention to cardiac. Now this is present, and it needs to be looked at as in that brain is an organ. And when something's wrong with that organ, you need to see the specialist that can help you to get through it.
Absolutely. And those of us, because we're all going to be there if we haven't already, and you need to not look at it as a stigma. You need to be supportive, just like you would if someone's going for surgery or whatever. And are we allowed to name names? Can we mention names?
You can say whatever you want.
Okay. Okay, like most of you guys did as a young firefighter, right? You're like, oh, I don't like the gloves my department gives me. So you look in the yellow pages back in that time, fire equipment dealer. So I stumbled across this place called American Safety and Firehouse. And the co-owner was a guy named Bill McDonald. His children are still in the business today. And he started out as a contract firefighter for American LaFrance out in Montana, which parlayed into him selling American LaFrance fire trucks, which parlayed into him having his own business, moving to Atlanta. And he shared with me when I had my first grab in Auburn, I was talking to him about it because, the skin was sloughing and stuff. And he said that he made a rescue years ago that was so badly burned that the next Thanksgiving, when his wife pulled the turkey out of the oven, he had a flashback to that image, to that person.
Wow.
So your question, has it always been here? It's always been here, right? I mean, that's, bless his heart, he passed away over 10 years ago. So we're talking back in the 50s, he was a firefighter,
Right.
So it's always been here. So where that relates to me is that, I had that experience at Auburn, and lo and behold, we're like having a barbecue. And how hot dogs split open?
Mm-hmm.
A couple hot dogs split open on the grill, and I had a flashback to this gentleman's, skin condition. So yeah, that's critical incident stress. That's whatever you want to call it. That's how it manifests itself. One of the most horrific days of my career was we had a fire in a mobile home park, and a lot of
Are
people
we going to have to
think
put a parental warning on this thing for graphic content? Holy shit, man! What are you doing?
maybe.
Go ahead.
So we had it was an immigrant family. 3 children were left unattended while both their parents worked the night shift, and a fire started. We pulled all 3 out. All 3 ended up perishing, but the one that I came out with and started working never regained respirations. The other 2 did. And so when we sent them off on the ambulance, mine didn't have respirations. The other 2 did. And automatically, what did I start doing? Did I do proper airway placement? Did I was using the BVM right? What was I doing? Why did mine not get respirations back?
Right.
And, I didn't know until maybe the next shift or later in that day when I saw the news that all 3 ended up perishing. But at the time, we were framing a house for, some of you guys might remember from DeKalb, a guy named Gary Helton. Gary Helton?
Yeah.
Okay. He was building this beautiful house, and we were framing it. And he and I arrived at the job site first. And I just started talking to him about that call because it was that night. And just talking to him about it was the healing I needed, and it was so powerful for me. And I never told him that. I don't know if, he probably doesn't even know that. But our conversation about that situation and the whole fire and the tragedy involved, just he and I talking was so healing for me. And I don't think I would have gotten through it the way I did had it not been for us having that conversation. So that's why that's a huge element of it, is us talking to each other as peers and also seeking out, the mental health when we need it. Because, when they come after a critical incident, they come to the station and give their spiel, nobody's going to raise their hand and say, you know what, this is how I'm feeling right now.
Right.
Because that's just not how we're wired. But I know for a fact people will contact them privately or talk amongst themselves, to kind of start that healing process.
So, Chris, you said something that kind of spurred me to think something, because I know I do it. You said you didn't know if the kids had died, and it was a shift or 2 before you found out that they did. Do you think that you actively you don't pursue that information?
Yeah, I didn't. I didn't actively pursue it. I have since. There have been times I have,
right?
But in that particular instance, I didn't. I didn't. And,
I think that's part of how I kind of process that, is that we're involved with the scene for this long, and then I kind of just flush it if I can.
Yeah,
I'm not following it to find out what happened, or
Right. And we've, I've seen people do that. I've seen people reconnect with people and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I don't think that's something we seek out to do on a regular basis, because as sterile as it sounds, I think the anonymity between us and the people we serve and help does help to shelter us mentally a little bit.
Right.
Yeah, I agree.
And I've gone to the hospital to check on people, and I have done that kind of follow up, but it's just something weird has to touch you about it to make you do that. But I think on a regular basis or long-term contact, I don't think that's healthy, because then you start owning everybody you serve, and
right.
No one can shoulder that burden.
Right.
No one can shoulder that burden.
Yeah, I want to kind of bring go ahead. Well, no, I'll let you go ahead, or you'll talk forever.
Yeah, please.
So we're going to go kind of full circle here a little bit. So you're talking about it's that we need to talk to somebody about the mental health part and the stress and the critical debriefing for what we do. And I think that plays really into what you were talking about earlier about being approachable as a leader and being somebody that somebody can come to, because a lot of these young leaders, young officers that are stepping up, I think they struggle with trying to connect with these younger generations and having those conversations, because they are going to see tough things that they're not used to seeing, that they haven't really been prepared for. And I think you do an excellent job at that, and you always really have, in my experience being around you, being that very approachable guy that they feel comfortable with and coming to and bringing their things that they've seen and looking for help.
And here again, that's just kind of you start building that as a firefighter, too, because at some point in your career, you're going to kind of focus in on what your ambitions are. So you need to start building yourself for that, hey, how am I going to get myself today and every step of the way to be who I want to be when I reach whatever I want to reach. So I think that's important. And, here again, just goes back to that being real and understanding that, you don't own even the positions we earn, the tested positions, we still don't own them. And it's an honor to have that position, not a entitlement. And here again, just, you gotta love people. I mean, some people don't love people, but you gotta love people. And, we've kind of focused on the critical incident stress related to the job. I'm going to go on 2 quick tangents. One is, at my level, some of my most stressful things have been totally unrelated to emergency services. It's the inner dynamics of how we treat each other internally. And then secondly, you also have to factor in people's external stressors.
Absolutely.
Because, that old saying, you don't bring your problems to work, that's garbage. Everybody brings their problems to work. You can't help it.
Right. Everybody takes them home.
Yep. So beyond the stressors of emergency operations, we really need to pay more focus on what external stressors.
Right.
And I'm gonna step on some toes here, especially with Hatch. I'm not a proponent. I know. Ooh. I'm not a proponent of. I know, right? Big hair. Big hair too.
Everybody always goes for the hair.
Strands of steel.
I know, right? Well, it's easy. It's easy, right?
It is easy.
It's we always go for what's easy. I know it is. I'm jealous, actually. I'm not a big proponent of working at 2 different fire departments, and I know a gazillion firefighters do it, but I kind of think you get enough with your one department, I'm not saying prohibited. I'm not saying, anything like that. But for me personally, as big of a fire junkie as I am, fire department junkie, I kind of got my fill with one department. And I think if you do have to work a second vocation, if you can do something that's unrelated, it kind of gives you that distraction. And I was having this very conversation this morning. It's very poignant because I didn't even know what we're going to be talking about. I had this very conversation with a guy who did it for 10 years. And he said, you don't realize the spiral you're in until you step out of it, because you're increasing the opportunity for sleep deprivation. You're increasing the opportunity to see bad things. You're increasing the time you're away from your family. So I guess I'm not trying to make this a sales pitch saying don't work in 2 fire departments. I just think I wish people would maybe recalibrate, if you're going to do that, the extent to which you invest in that second department, and not let it become a second full-time vocation. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely.
From a mental health perspective, absolutely.
Yeah. But I get it because, hey, we all got to, none of us earn enough. I mean, historically, in this part of the country, fire departments are underpaid for what they should be. Everyone acknowledges that. We know it's a fact. We know it's the truth. So how are you going to maintain the lifestyle you want for your family? Well, you're going to seek other employment. And another fire department's kind of easy because, you can slip right in. You've already got the certifications. You already know the lingo. But if you're like, I want to learn how to be an electrician, you got to start from scratch. Or if you're like, I want to, be a plumber, you got to start from scratch. And it's weird because when I came in the fire service, that's what most firefighters did, was another trade. But I think we've gotten away from that. You have far less people today that do a trade on the side and far more that work in another fire department, So.
Yeah, Chris, this is Pabel, and I'd be remiss if I didn't jump in here for 1 second. And I 100% understand what you're saying.
You have no idea what you just started.
So, and I'm not in complete disagreement. And I have to be cautious not to step on a landmine with the subject matter. But, there are states that have strong unions that actually oppose that type of work, that specifically say that you can't, for some of the reasons that you stated. And we did transition out of the generation where predominantly we had some of those second trade jobs that weren't related to the fire service. And we've transitioned more into, like you said, there are a lot of more people. It's a lot easier for you to go find a secondary job within public safety, whether you're running on an ambulance or going to another fire department, because, the wages aren't supportive of a single job. So a lot of people have to go out and seek those wages somewhere else. Yep. What I would add to it is if I think we can do a lot better of a job in public safety, period, to make sure that people are doing work to have a very clear understanding of themselves. And that's going to help you to make a determination of, what will work for you, what won't work for you.
Yeah.
You'll have somebody that'll put 30 years in and do 2 jobs and public safety, and they're perfectly fine with it. And they were actually able to shape a lot of the fire service, and there's no issues. And then you can absolutely have people that try to venture out in that same avenue, and it could destroy their lives because they don't know how to balance their work and their personal life, and one may take over the other, and so on and so forth. So I know it's a real tricky and complex subject because, you have a lot of firefighters that are going to that second job that's, again, fire or EMS, and being in a place that has 200 firefighters that show up as their second day on the job, and there's not that many that operate that way. We see the benefits of it, and I'm not disagreeing with you. You could definitely see, hey, I think we need to be more mindful. Let me just say this. I think we need to be more mindful as leaders to be paying attention to the signals to go, you may be in over your head. You may be overexerting yourself, putting in too much.
And true, and I'm not saying don't go work in another fire department, don't go work on an ambulance. What I'm saying is don't do 48/24s. And here's a whole other flip side, and Hatch will get a kick out of this because he kind of knows my story, and being, a latecomer to being a husband and a dad. I mean, it's the greatest gift in the world. And when I was contemplating the future of my career shortly after my son was born, I was talking to one of our guys who's a retired deputy chief. And the neat thing about this guy, he's very devout in his faith, but he's the kind of person that the only reason he's devout in his faith is because of how he lives his life. He's not the one that's telling you, hey, I'm this, I'm this, I'm this. It just, once you know the guy and the way he lives his life, you're like, okay, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So he's not in your face with it. But we had this half-an-hour conversation, and he said, well, Chris, it sounds to me like you've already made your mind up to where you want to take your career path as it relates to your family. He said, and to reinforce what you're saying, I'm going to just leave you with this thought. He said, you're not put on this earth to work. He said, you're put on this earth to show your children a path to righteousness. And that was the most powerful statement anyone's made to me to help shape the decisions I have to make for my future and for my family's future. And then, then you hear all the corny phrases on social media. Your kids aren't going to remember what you give them. They're going to remember what, the time you're with them. And that, Maya Angelou, who recently passed away, she's like a renowned poet and stuff like that. She had a pretty neat saying. She said that, people are going to forget what you say. People are going to forget what you do, but they're going to always remember how you made them feel. Mm-hmm. So, I think you just need to take the path in your life that's going to help you accomplish what you want personally. And the Achilles heel for us in the fire service is we have such an insane passion for what we do. Accountants don't go on vacation to the beach bringing patches and T-shirts to trade at other accounting firms down at the beach.
So true.
No. They bring typewriters and stuff.
They don't go podcasting down at the beach just so they could talk shop.
Right. Their family doesn't wear sweatshirts and hoodies with the accounting firm's logo on it. So we're so crazy in love with what we do that it can overtake our life if we let it. So I think it's important.
Coming from you, point, that's a lot too.
Yeah, I mean, I was there.
Yeah, you were 100%. I was there. These guys don't know you quite as well as I do, but yeah you were 100% there.
No, I was there. I would redo my career a whole different way. I would not change my passion, enthusiasm, or dedication, but I would change how I let it manifest in my personal and professional life.
I would say that you're bringing a little bit of a different perspective for this reason. For instance, I have 4 kids. And coming into the fire service, I I was almost a kid myself. I was very young trying to figure all this stuff out, where you had a certain level of wisdom when you started the family that you're able to transition like that. And also,
No doubt.
The later you are into your career, obviously you hopefully are in a better financial state than you were in your 20s when you first came in. So
exactly.
For some of these guys that I see, and they are, in their 20s, starting their families, trying to buy a house, my recommendation is always don't buy a $60,000 truck. That can probably help you financially. Avoid buying that $60,000 truck and just drive something you can afford for a while, because you will pay for this in the long run. And I think that's another component. I did have the luxury coming into the fire service. First of all, family full of firefighters. But even going into some of the departments, to have some of those senior people in there that are wise enough to go, look, don't go buying a $60,000 truck, and don't go do this. Put your money over here and set yourself up for tomorrow, because this job is going to beat the hell out of your body, and eventually you're going to have to, set yourself up. So it's interesting the perspective that you bring, because of the fact that you're already mature into your careers. You got the wisdom behind you. So hopefully some of our younger people can hear this to set themselves up, because really, when you make some of the financial decisions that I think we all have being young, they're going to set you back, and they're going to force you to be in a position that's not going to be healthy for you.
You hit the nail on the head, and I'm gonna have to duck out, because we are going to be going to a little kiddo birthday party in a little while. I hope
Excellent.
I hope we hit the topic long enough, but I want to share with you. You hit the nail on the head. Because it's all about balance, right? And I think the reason I have the mentality I do, like you said, I've the advantage of the wisdom and a little bit better financial position than when you're young with a family. But I also didn't have it for so long. I truly, like, if there's something you don't have, when you get it, you value it that much more.
Yes.
And a good friend of mine had a neat comment. He said, because I was talking about, like, you see some of these people that do these hobbies that take away from their family. And I was like, I'm not interested in that. And he said, you've reached true happiness in life when your family becomes your favorite hobby.
Yes.
But guys, I appreciate the opportunity. I know I've been a windbag just gabbing away.
No, it's
but
been
I
awesome.
appreciate you.
Yeah, you gave us a lot of good nuggets for the listeners to chew on and think about.
Well,
We really appreciate you taking the time with us.
Man, I wish I could do some more. Maybe we'll do another one again. And,
we probably already broke the world record for the longest podcast we've ever had. So.
Well,
oh Lord Jesus!
You passed the audition, so we might actually let you come do it in person. So
there you go.
This was a phone interview.
Yeah, that has to happen.
Guys, thank you so much for the opportunity.
All right,
thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris.
I got it. See you.
Holy
I think he may have
smokes!
fell down the steps.
What an ending! All right, listeners, I hope there's something that you guys could take from that. I'm sure there is. He had a lot to say, and he's a great guy. I've known him for years, and just a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of experience and perspective. I saw several times little eyes perk up when he said something just sitting around the table here. So if you have any questions or anything that you want to ask us, or questions you want us to bring up on the podcast, definitely reach out to us at Combustible the Podcast.
info@combustibleThePodcast.com.
Info@combustibleThePodcast.com.
We can only afford one email address.
One minute. That's right. The funds are very, very tight.
Sponsorship should start rolling in.
Yeah. It'd really be nice. But anyway, thank you very much for tuning in, listening to us, and hope to hear from you next time.
All right. Thanks. See you.
All right.